Okay, so it's 3:30 and I know we've got limited time. Hopefully those who join us will be able to work out where to sit. This is what they call a round table, so obviously we're sort of in a semicircle here and you're around us. Welcome. Some of you may have come to this morning's session, and in some ways it's a continuation, but a very different perspective on the whistleblower protection work that these organizations and people do. And we're looking at it from the lived experience of whistleblowers and partnerships to advance whistleblowers' rights and protections around the world. Just for those of you, and I didn't mention speakers, that we have some translation into Spanish, so it's important, and I'm just reminding myself now to speak slowly, or more slowly than we're used to. And in this topic, there's a lot of fast talkers. I wanted to very briefly introduce myself. My name is Anna Myers. I'm the Executive Director of the Whistleblowing International Network, which is a network of non-profit organizations working around the world to protect whistleblowers. We have 37 members in approximately 25 countries and are growing. Since we met at our first WIN conference in 2019, where 75 delegates from 25 countries descended on Glasgow, Scotland, and it was a great session. I guess we're competing mics. The membership have collaborated on high-profile cases and important ones, not always exactly the same, whether they're high-profile and important. They have picked up important public interest cases that have fallen between the cracks due to cross-border nature or lack of protections in different parts of the world. They've helped to strengthen legal protections around the world, and they've worked both as a network but in networks of networks. And they have generally and meaningfully become an effective and adaptable force to challenge abuses of power around the world, bringing international attention to the attacks on laws, organizations, institutions that are supporting whistleblowers as well. And one thing just thought I wanted to start with is the key to eliminating a threat like a whistleblower is to isolate, discredit, and harass them out of being seen as a potential information source and a reliable source of credible information. So whistleblower organizations and those that work with whistleblowers do all in their power to put a circle of support around them to ensure this doesn't happen, can't continue, or to help rehabilitate the whistleblowers so their disclosures make a difference. So as a network within a community of anti-corruption experts, we are stronger as well ourselves to work with whistleblowers to protect them more effectively. So without further ado, we have an incredible array of experts who have both the lived experience, some of them as whistleblowers, and then we're going to talk about the partnerships that and the organizations as well that support whistleblowers and how we work together. So I'd like to start with Jim Wasserstrom. I think it's better if they introduce themselves. I've known Jim for a number of years, but he's really good at introducing himself. So go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. Anna, am I on? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Yes, my name is Jim Wasserstrom, and I am a whistleblower, a living, breathing one. And when I say that, I always feel like I'm at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, my name is Jim Wasserstrom, and I'm an alcoholic. But no, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm a whistleblower. And as a whistleblower, I became a whistleblower in 2006, 7, 8, when I uncovered a massive corruption scheme while working for the United Nations in the UN mission in Kosovo. It was a $5 billion contract to build a new coal mine and power plant in Kosovo. And my job at the time was overseeing the public utilities, so it came under my purview. And with the help of my Kosovar deputy, we learned that there was built into one of the bids a 10% kickback. That's $500 million for those of us who are doing good, simple math. And in that $500 million, $500 million, there was a piece set aside for my boss, the deputy governor, the UN deputy special representative of the Secretary General in Kosovo. And I heard this from multiple sources, and eventually assembled a case that I submitted to the UN Inspector General in New York, who I knew, who had worked in Kosovo with me. She found the claims I was making credible and sent a team of 12 investigators to look into the allegation. In the meantime, sadly, she sent an email to the Secretary General to inform him, Ban Ki-moon, that this was taking place. And of course, the UN leaks like a sieve, so that information found its way within minutes, probably, to the people that I was accusing of the wrongdoing in the UN system, my boss. And I had two of them, the governor and the deputy governor. That led to quite a dramatic retaliation against me, where I was personally myself accused of corruption. I was arrested at the border of Kosovo when I was going home for the weekend to visit my family, since I live in Greece. They brought me back under armed guard, did an illegal search and seizure to uncover any kind of evidence against me, and then claimed I was then suspended for a year while they did investigations. I filed as a whistleblower that I was being retaliated against for having blown the whistle on the corruption. They launched criminal administrative investigations against me. So for a year, I was under 4 investigations. At the end of the investigative period, during that time, I was, as I said, suspended. But my reputation, my credibility, the media coverage, which the UN encouraged, was extremely negative and damaging. There was an attempt, not an attempt, there was a hit put out on me because I was getting in the way of a $500 million deal. So it was, to say the least, an extremely traumatic experience. The reports came out that from the UN's investigative services that there was I wasn't guilty of any wrongdoing, but there wasn't any retaliation either. All the terrible things that I've just outlined for you were considered to be the random acts by rogue actors, quote, unquote. I hired an attorney. We went into the depths of the UN so-called justice system, and to everyone's amazement, we actually won at the lower court level. The media, which had been vilifying me, suddenly I became more of a heroic David versus the UN Goliath, and the story became much more favorable to me. But in the end, I lost in the justice system on a procedural matter, but I raised the visibility of this issue because the story ended up being covered in more than 700 newspapers around the world. I guess that's the benefit of being a UN whistleblower. It got a lot of coverage, and I was I went to the U.S. Congress, wrote a letter to the Secretary of State saying that John Kerry at the time said the UN needs to be cleaned up because I'm not the only one, there are others. And the State Department, in typical fashion, ignored it, but the Congress did not, and passed a law that said the UN must adhere to best practices in the implementation, keyword, implementation of best practices for whistleblower protection, or it would lose 15% of the U.S. funding. That was on the books for nearly a decade. It was used on a number of occasions, certainly used to scare the Secretariat. So in a sense, while I had to go through the trials of the damned and lost my livelihood for a period of time, had certainly psychological mental health issues, family suffered tremendously through some of this period. I'm here alive and well, and to try to change the narrative around whistleblowers, which I guess we'll talk about at a later moment.
Thank you so much, Jim. And just to say, there's a lot more work to do with the UN. There's a lot more whistleblowers through the UN system, and there's a lot of whistleblowers that are coming up through the funding process of the UN, where they are funding projects, and there are whistleblowers within those systems who aren't considered employees of the UN, but still need to have some protections. So even though the protections have not really developed as we'd like, there are more whistleblowers than there ever were before, and that's an interesting juxtaposition here. Our next speaker, Claudia Escobar, is joined us. She's not on the program, so this is a delight. She was part of it, but she wasn't sure she could make it, and she can explain maybe why. But this is another very important person who's lived through the experience of whistleblowing. And could you explain a little bit? And I know 5 minutes does not do justice, but then we can come back and give you another chance to speak.
Okay, hi. Thank you for inviting me and to share this story. I will make a long story short. I am a Guatemalan lawyer. I served in the judiciary for 10 years in Guatemala, from 2007 to 2014, when I had to denounce, I was forced to denounce the head of the Congress who tried to bribe me in exchange for a resolution that at the time will favor the vice president. And this was done in the middle of a process of election of judges for the higher courts, where I was applying to. So he offered me to be reelected as a judge instead of helping the vice president in a case that she had in my court. So I was able to record the conversation and press charges against him. It's sometimes difficult to understand my country. Guatemala is a post-conflict country that went through a long period of civil war. The institutions are weak, especially the judicial institutions. And after the peace accords that were signed at the end of last century, the United Nations created a special commission against impunity that is known as CICIG. And this commission was staying in the country for almost 12 years, and it helped strengthen some of the capacities of the Attorney General Office, El Ministerio Público. And because the United Nations had this special mission in Guatemala, I felt that I could trust an organization that was going to do investigations objectively. And that's how I was able to present this case to the commission. They investigated, and finally the head of the Congress was in a trial, and he was sentenced for influence peddling and corruption and bribery, and had to face 14 years of prison. And the sad part is that I was retaliated by the government, and I had to relocate with my family out of Guatemala and went to the United States. But
6 children.
6 children.
Yeah, I'm a mother of 6 kids that are adults now, most of them. And it is difficult to start again, especially when you are a lawyer. You're not a lawyer in other countries. You are only a lawyer in your own country. So you are in a different place, a place where really you don't feel familiar with. It's a difficulty with the language. So you have to start over again. And you face a lot of emotional distress, because I describe it like going through a tsunami. Everything that is familiar to you, everything that you feel comfortable is not there anymore. And you have to find different ways to reinvent yourself and continue doing the work that you care about. I always care about fighting for the independence of the judiciary, and that was also one of my priorities. Meanwhile, I was a judge, tried to promote reforms that will protect judges, that will allow judges to be in the bench without political appointments, because I think that that's a way of controlling judges and controlling an important power of the state that needs to be independent. So I became an advocacy for the independence of the judiciary. I believe that the judiciary is the best tool to fight corruption. And after I became a fellow at Harvard in the program of Scholars at Risk, I was admitted in another program in the National Endowment for Democracy in Washington, and I stayed in Washington since. So
Thank you so much, Claudia. And our next speaker is Vladimir Radomirovich, and perhaps a little disclaimer, not a disclaimer, but Vladimir is the chair of the board of the Whistleblowing International Network. But please, your turn, and do introduce yourself.
Thank you, Anna. And thanks to the organizers for organizing this panel and for doing this big conference. That's really awesome. So listening to Jim and Claudia, I'm reminded of Serbian whistleblowers. We actually have a judge who's a whistleblower. And Jim, as a journalist, I'm a journalist. So I think it was 2003 and 2004, I worked with a source, a whistleblower, who blew the whistle on the same sort of scheme. A big Western company was bribing officials in the EU and Serbia to get the job of reconstruction of coal plants. So I've been working with sources and whistleblowers forever. That's my life. I've been a journalist for 30 years, and I've worked with a number of sources from the government, from the private sector. But then in 2009, I became a whistleblower myself. This happened because the newspaper I was working for at the time, the biggest newspaper in Serbia, had just changed the editor and the management. It was because the government owned a part of the newspaper. They were able to push for a new editorial policy, which meant that any articles critical of the government were being censored. And a group of journalists protested this, so we blew the whistle on censorship, and then we found out that the Prime Minister of Serbia, who was supposed to keep an eye on the public shares in the newspaper, had signed a contract. His private company signed a contract with the same paper, so he was making money off the newspaper. And we blew the whistle on this. We were fired, but in the process we discovered how difficult it is to be a whistleblower. Having worked with so many sources over the years, we were left without any support, and that's how the idea of launching a platform that would give voice to whistleblowers and also offer legal help to them was born. So in 2010 we launched Pištaljka, which means the whistle, and immediately in 2010 we started publishing articles based on tips we received through the website on big corruption in Serbia. Then we organized several roundtable discussions with whistleblowers, including the judge I just mentioned. And then we advocated for the adoption of a law. In 2012, government changed, and we used this brief window of opportunity to push for a strong whistleblowing law. So in 2014, Serbia got its law. I was on the working group to draft the law, but also two other whistleblowers were. And we got a very good law. We had help from Anna and what was then an informal group that was the predecessor to Whistleblowing International Network. And also in 2014, we hired lawyers to provide free legal aid to whistleblowers. And so in the past 14 years, we published more than 1,000 articles, either based on tips from whistleblowers or our own investigations, and articles about whistleblowers, because that's what we did from the first, when we launched Pištaljka, we published stories about whistleblowers. We have provided advice to more than 3,500 people. We have represented more than 100 whistleblowers in court proceedings, and what I'm most proud of is we have won more than 60% of cases. We have made sure that the courts understand whistleblowing. We do training for judges together with the Judicial Academy in Serbia. And we make sure that they know about the law, but more importantly, to emphasize with whistleblowers, because whistleblowers are the guardians of the public interest. And we want the judges and the court system and the prosecutors as well to understand this. Thank you.
That's in 5 minutes. Thank you so much, Vladimir. And just to say, you know, the 5 minutes and what they're telling you, the years of experience, the years of trial and tribulation, you know, cannot possibly be expressed on this stage at this session, and it would take a lot of time. But to do what you do when you have the commitment, and probably blowing the whistle was the first sign, and you know, nobody starts out thinking they're blowing the whistle, they're thinking they're doing their jobs, is a sign, and that you can turn that experience into value for others is incredibly powerful. The next set of speakers are not necessarily those who've had direct and obvious whistleblowing experience, but I'm sure if you thought back in your past, some of you have actually challenged power in your lives and experienced some of this, or didn't, but if you did, you would then become a whistleblower. But Arpita here is, if you can introduce yourself, Arpita Dutt is a lawyer from the UK, has experience representing whistleblowers, and we'll talk a bit about a project and what it does and what you're doing.
That's right. I'm a UK-based employment lawyer, and I've represented numerous whistleblowers over the years. And what I've witnessed is the complex, traumatic, and life-changing impact of whistleblowing on their lives. I'm also chair of Parrhesia, a UK charity think tank. And what we do is we focus on the protection, promotion, and practice of the human rights of whistleblowers. So Parrhesia is a Greek word, and what it means is the powerful, guaranteeing protection to the vulnerable in exchange for truth. And we at Parrhesia think we need to guarantee protection to whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are human rights defenders, as Mary Lawler said in the plenary session this morning. Well, Parrhesia has an international academic council, and our academic council has contributed to a significant body of research in the area of trauma in whistleblowing. We held our first conference on trauma in whistleblowing earlier this year. And we also launched a podcast series, and what we want to do with that, and what we have done, is to amplify the voices and the experiences of whistleblowers. And what you'll find, listening to Jim, Claudia, and Vladimir, and two of the anti-corruption whistleblowers on our podcast, Jonathan Taylor, who's actually doing a parallel session here today, and Ian Foxley, Dr. Ian Foxley, the founder and CEO of Parrhesia. There are very common experiences. There's a playbook of institutional betrayal, but the common experiences of trauma and those life-changing impacts can be categorized into 4 domains: work, finance, home, and health. So in respect of work, this often means the loss of work, the loss of a career, often a specialist career, a falling from grace, a loss of professional reputation, an exclusion from an industry or a sector. As soon as Dr. Foxley, our CEO, blew the whistle, he fled from Riyadh in Saudi Arabia to the UK, and he spent 13 years pursuing his case. He immediately lost his job. He was never to return to the telecommunications industry. His career was over, and it took him 12 years for the UK Serious Fraud Office to investigate and bring prosecutions. Jonathan Taylor also lost his legal career. He worked as legal counsel for SBM Offshore, an oil company. Both exposed bribery. Both could be classed as successful whistleblowers because their whistleblowing led to millions of fines, 2 prosecutions, and recovery. But both of them experienced huge trauma, and Ian describes it as a very painful experience for him and his family. Not only is there a loss of career, but the loss of income is at the same time as having to defend often litigation. With Jonathan Taylor, whilst going on holiday with his family to Croatia, he found himself on the receiving end of a strategic lawsuit against public participation, a SLAP. He had his home and his bank account frozen, and yet he had to find the money for legal fees in a foreign jurisdiction. And anti-corruption whistleblowers often find themselves in this space. So from Britain, he had to find Dutch lawyers, fighting through the Dutch courts, and eventually finding US lawyers too. So financially, totally injurious. And what we also know from research is health is affected. When a person confronts corruption in an organisation, they can experience biological, physiological, psychological, and sociological impacts. And that impacts them physically. Physical health effects such as high blood pressure, cardiovascular issues, stress, insomnia, and now we know that post-traumatic stress disorder also results. And what that means is the requirement of therapeutic treatment over the long term and a vulnerability to relapse in the future. So there are long-term impacts of the whistleblowing experience. So what we think at Parrhesia is restitution of whistleblowers shouldn't just be focused on compensatory outcomes, but on a number of things: a legal support fund, expert therapeutic counselling, re-employment support, a cultural change public awareness programme that benefits whistleblowers and advocates them to the public, political support, PR support, and coordinated research.
Thank you very much, Akita. And now I'd like to turn to Susanna Farrell, who's going to talk about the organization and the work of GlobaLeaks.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Susanna Farrell. I am project manager at GlobaLeaks. I'm going to tell you more about the GlobaLeaks project because it's a project that was created just to avoid the stories that we just heard, because the idea behind the project that was created in 2011 was to create a safe place where people can report, to protect them during their reporting process, to avoid the exposure of the identity of the information about the whistleblower, and this mainly through the creation of a digital tool to report safely. You know that in Europe now we have a new legal framework, a recent legal framework, which provide for every public and private organization to have both written and oral channels. This is, of course, because people need to access different type of channels. The oral channels, so messaging, vocal messages, telephone, in-person meeting, are maybe more accessible to some types of people, but we as GlobaLeaks think that the most important thing for whistleblowers is security. So for us, the digital tools are the most secure channels to report safely. And GlobaLeaks was built exactly with this in mind, so to protect the identity, the confidentiality of the process, but combining also the usability of a digital tool, which should be quite accessible to everyone. So if you just want to Google globaleaks.org, you can find the demo, and you can find that it's very easy to use. So it's not complicated. It's just a form online that every whistleblower can use in a very easy way, but providing people technological security. We don't collect IP addresses, so it's a tool to protect whistleblowers. And the channel is just one of the ingredients in an effective whistleblowing, in an effective reporting process, in an effective whistleblowing system. But of course, it's the first step when one person wants to report. And GlobaLeaks, one of the most important things is that it's a free and open source tool. So this is for us a great value because, of course, because it's free and so accessible to everyone, and you can download it and install by yourself without, if you have the skills, the technical skills to do it, but it's available for everyone. And it's open source. That means that it grows and develops with the contribution of the community that is using the software. So we develop it day by day, and with people using it in the public sector, in the private sector. So we gain feedback from them, and according to their needs, we develop new features, new functionalities. And so I think we try to create something that meets the needs of both the people that want to report to, but also the people that use the software to manage the reports. And as I said, it can be applied for different sectors. It's used by public authorities. It's used by private organization, and is used by civil society organization because it's just not for reporting corruption, but every kind of violation of misconduct. So a lot of organization, Transparency International, chapters are using the software to receiving reports from people that witness corruption or other irregularities, and also is used by media to protect their sources, to receive information by sources in a secure way, in a secure platform. And yes, because I just remind what we have been hearing this morning during the plenary, defending the defenders. We talk about, the panelists were talking about the risk of using, for instance, social media, because maybe it's a more immediate tool and that it's easier for quick communication, but then there are a lot of threats behind the use of social media for the people that report. We had an example. We were in Prague a couple of months ago, speaking with journalists which work in Belarus, and they just explain us the risk that people they got during the protests against the government. A lot of reports through social media, but then the people were arrested because they speak up through using Telegram or other tools like this. So we encourage the use of these kind of tools because for us are the best way people can report in a safely manner without risking what other people we have seen that have risk.
Thank you so much, Susanna. And I think it can't be overemphasized, the importance of the open source aspect. For those of us who are lawyers, that sounds risky. Of course, it does mean that it can be properly tested and proven to be secure, and that there are a lot of systems that are worked with by private companies, and that even GlobaLeaks have found out are not as secure. There's problems or bugs that aren't picked up. And so a platform like GlobaLeaks definitely does. That's their job. That's what the community does to make it safer and strengthen its security all the time. And it is GlobaLeaks. So although they're based in Italy, they do work around the world, and they certainly have a well-known reputation in Europe. So we'd like to turn to Mexico. And I'd like to introduce Pablo, or I'll ask Pablo to introduce himself.
Thank you.
And as you can see, our panel has already gone from the US, Guatemala, Serbia, the UK, Italy, and Mexico, and then we'll talk to somebody who's doing the international sphere. But whistleblowing is a global issue because humans are humans all around the world, and they do speak up when they see things going wrong. And here we are, and it's an important issue around the world. So please go ahead, Pablo.
Thank you, Ana, and hello, everyone. My name is Pablo Herrera. I consider myself as a young advocator, and I'm the coordinator of litigation and special projects of DLM, a Mexican nonprofit dedicated to demand accountability with a human rights perspective. We have come to understand that talking about accountability and addressing corruption is something that does not need to be segregated from human right and its impact. And we have come to realize that us as professionals and experts in our field, and specifically lawyers too, in the efforts that we do sometimes, we just get things far away from people. You know, we get justice far away from people. We go very technical on stuff that we have made justice and human rights a very exclusive kind of field. So in the work that DLMs does, it was actually founded in 2015 to address this reduction on civic space that is faced in Latin America, and how it's different context on speaking about what civil society does in the States, for example, and all the restrictions that we face in countries like Latin American context, that it's not just funding restrictions, it's also stigmatization, violence, spyware abuse, that in the end promotes this restriction to actually democratic states, to the prevailing of the rule of law. We have also come to understand that corruption is a very profitable topic. Within these modern governments, corruption has become everything and has become nothing. And we have not realized that the people who's actually been living the struggles of corruption sometimes don't know how to address it or define it. You know, we have made this context far away from them. We've directed a parallel report of the implementation of the UNCAC in Mexico. And we've discovered also that civil society organizations and human rights defenders are unaware of the legal standing that they've got to access to justice, to constitutional proceedings to demand the reparation of human rights violations. We work specifically to promote the human right to live in an environment free of corruption, the human right to have good public administration, and the human right to defend human rights, and how our systems of impunity and corruption have created more technical and practical obstacles that, in the end, close every space. So in this topic that this part of the circle is addressing, it's amazing that we've decided to create this space as a circle, because we know that there's a circle between corruption and impunity in many states that has not been able to be addressed because we have not been able to build circles of our own. I think that as a result of directing this parallel report, we were able to counsel the Mexican delegation to the 10th CUSP of the UNCAC in Atlanta. It was the first exercise that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Mexico has done involving civil society organization that allowed to put at front of the negotiations of the Mexican team the concerns raised by civil society organizations, the projects developed by civil society organizations, and recognizing that the need that public officials and all of the other anti-corruption agents need to look to the other side. You know, I think there's a Mexican saying, when you're not looking at the whole panorama, that you're going like a racehorse, you know, you're going like this. And I think that we're all pulling the same strings in this corruption battle. We're all fighting the same battle. We're just like very focused on our own like specific aims, each like civil society organization, each human rights defender, that we're not able to look on the side. So regarding these partnerships to advance whistleblower protections, we need to like acknowledge the need to look to the other side, to look and strengthen the capacity of civil society organizations, strengthen state capacity and public officials' capacity, looking to journalists and looking to lawyers, and understanding that there's a clear and crucial need to build stronger systems of cooperation and coordination that allow us to not just enhance the battle of corruption, but to actually take effective acts and reforms, you know, and addressing this reduction to civic space and getting to know that Mexican and Latin American civil society sometimes in these human rights defend activities, they're unaware of like the legal standing or the tools that they have to provide for an effective defense of human rights. So it's part of our efforts are exactly this, you know, providing the tools to overcome these obstacles, to make actual actual change and have like the preparedness for civil society to provide those like huge gaps within public institution and to corner authorities, to do something, to enhance the change. It's very understandable for sure that authorities will never cover every aim. There's a lack of economic or human resources, but on providing preparedness for civil society organizations and other relevant agents, you're allowed also to turn the eye to the public institutions and demand that they look at the concerns that are around us. It's about creating a systemic change in terms of who's at charge. Me as a young person, we grew up and I think we never question sometimes why systems are like that. We just it is what it is, but we build systems for us. So in this preparedness is having the capacity to change our systems to actually provide actions for the interest of society in general. And we've got several examples on this, like closing the circle, which is part of what I want to tell you, this connection between agents that I will tell you on the next part.
Great. Thank you so much, Pablo. And our last beginning intervention is Jennifer, and she's with the Signals Network. And would you like to introduce yourself, Jennifer Gibson?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm the legal director at the Signals Network. We are a U.S. nonprofit that operates internationally to protect whistleblowers who are working with the media in some fashion or form. And I think it might be worth at this point giving you a little bit, we're relatively new, 5 years old, but some of the origins for why it came about, because I think it's important to understand the context. For whistleblowers don't accidentally wind up working with journalists. They're not looking for attention. The number of times I get asked that, it is amazing. The whistleblowers who often wind up working with the media have tried everything else. They've tried internally, they've tried regulators, nobody responded, they've tried government, they've tried getting lawyers sometimes and can't get legal responses. And so out of desperation, they wind up talking to journalists. And yet this is both the area where whistleblowing can have the biggest impact in terms of eliciting change, and yet the area where whistleblowers are least protected legally. And the organization comes from a journalistic/legal background in the sense that the founder was working as the head of Reporters Without Borders in the US and witnessed in the past decade, a bit more than that, a series of journalists get taken to court for the government to get access to their sources. This was the height of the kind of Obama administration. The Obama administration went after journalists for their sources, their national security sources. I came at it from a slightly different perspective because I spent 10 years strategically litigating on national security issues, and specifically the war on terror. And I interacted with many of these whistleblowers because they provided vital information to accountability efforts in the war on terror, and was always struck in every interaction by how alone they were. There was nobody with them. There was nobody supporting them. And in several instances did reconciliations with clients where, my clients would come with several people around them and the whistleblower was there on their own. And the trauma was obvious, the need for support was obvious. And on the US side, when the journalists were being taken to court, the journalists had an entire freedom of the press coalition around them. The Freedom of the Press Coalition in the US and internationally is quite strong. Civil society turned out in droves. When the whistleblowers then went to court with charges, nobody was there, or very few people were there. And so the idea behind the Signals Network was not just in the national security context, but in the broader journalistic field. There needs to be support for whistleblowers who are working with journalists. There needs to be someone there who isn't conflicted. And while there are some journalists who do great jobs with their sources, there is always an inherent conflict there between getting the story out and supporting the whistleblower. And many journalists, for ethical reasons, can't provide the type of support that whistleblowers need. There's a line in the sand, ethically, for journalists on what they can and can't do for their sources. So the Signals Network works both to provide direct support to those whistleblowers and also to work with journalists on how they can better support their sources. So whistleblowers come to us 3 different ways. Sometimes a journalist directly refers the whistleblower to us and says, I've got a source I'm working with, they need help, they need support, can you talk to them? We then have whistleblowers who come directly to us who are already talking to a journalist and realized, wait a minute, I think I need to talk to someone else right now and find out where my risk is. And then also whistleblowers who are tried everything else who come to us and say, I really want to talk to the media. I feel like I don't have any other options. Can you talk to me? Can you help me? And what you find with all of these whistleblowers, and I think this has been kind of reiterated again and again, but is worth saying again, is the legal protection is a really small piece of the puzzle. Certainly I'm the legal director, but it's rarely the law I'm looking at on how to protect these individuals, because it's either not there or it's not the right protection for what they need, and the multitude of needs is significant. It's not just how do I make sure that I'm legally protected, but how do I get the psychosocial support I need? How do I digitally be safe in my interactions so that if I'm trying to remain anonymous, and many of the people I work with, many of the whistleblowers, they're trying to remain anonymous. They're trying not to lose their careers. They're trying not to lose their livelihoods. But they feel compelled to get the information out somehow. And sometimes it's physical security. So the last point I'll make, because I realize we're out of time, and then we can talk about how we build that network, because the name says everything. We try to build a network around the whistleblower. But the last thing I'll say is, because we work internationally, we are working everywhere from tech whistleblowers in the US, which is a whole other set of issues, to contexts where the law is never going to protect whistleblowers, right? And you're dealing with real security concerns. And in all of these contexts, the one thing that we need to start doing as we expand circles is realizing that whistleblowers are human rights defenders. And we need to start treating them in many of these contexts as human rights defenders. And I find rarely do people, when they're talking about human rights defenders, think of whistleblowers. And they look at me when I'm nuts, when I'm saying, well, I've got a whistleblower in X country, we need to get them out. They're a human rights defender. And they're like, huh? And so I'll leave with that, which is to say I think we need to start broadening circles and start talking about the overlap and the fundamental role whistleblowers are playing in many of these contexts.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So a couple of quick things that mostly the sort of thinking about it with Jennifer's just said and what we've been talking about, Pablo was saying. So one of the sort of, I think sort of, what would it be, instinctive reason behind the Whistleblowing International Network, and it is a great acronym, WIN, since that's not the word that a lot of people associate with whistleblowers or feel that it's part of it, and it's a positive word, was there is a whistleblower protection community, but we need to highlight each other's work, and we do exist. And it's growing fast, and it's been there all along, but it's been very, very quiet. So that's an important thing. Tom Devine, who's the legal director of the Government Accountability Project, and Sam Feinstein from the Government Accountability Project was on the podium this morning. I love quoting Tom, and I don't always say it's him because I believed it anyway, is as lawyers, as good lawyers, we know if all you have is the law, you're pretty much screwed. And so the law doesn't walk with you in your workplace. It doesn't help you make decisions. What you want is good advice that puts you in the most reasonable position, that allows you to maximize the opportunities that the disclosure will get addressed and the public interest will be protected while minimizing the risk to yourself. And if you're giving advice and creating these networks, then what you want is to put them in the best position that they can defend against attacks and they can use the legal frameworks that are available to them to recompense. So we're dealing with a lot of issues because it's a human activity to raise concerns, to try and get things addressed. So I'm going to go back to the panel now and talk about the networks, the groups you've worked with, or the professions, and what you're doing. So we got quite into some of the solutions, and both Jim and Claudia were talking about more about their experience. So starting with you two, and Claudia, you can both add to, but I'm sure add your own. What have you done since around this space, and what are you doing now that gives you pleasure and is filling some gaps that you see as having both been whistleblowers.
Thank you, Anna. This is all very personal for me, so I will tell it the way it happened. While I was going through the trauma of my experience, of course, I had absolutely no support. None of this wonderful stuff existed when I did this 15 years ago, and I had no support at all whatsoever in any way. So I was completely on my own. And as the experience unfolded, as traumatic and traumatizing as it was, at a certain point I said, when I was over some of the worst of it and coming out the other side, I said, what would I have liked to have had? What could I suggest to other people who may find themselves in this situation going forward? So I wrote a small paper for myself, essentially, and I shared it with a few people in different places, one of whom, Matthew Murray, is here, an old friend from my growing up days. And so I wrote down what I now call the 3 R's of recovery, regeneration, and reentry, because I'm not one to give up the fight. I'm very much an anti-corruption professional, have been for decades. I work in troubleshooting. I'm not a technical assistance person. I believe in trying to solve problems as they arise, and governments will call me in for when they have problems that they feel they are overwhelmed by in this area. But before that, I said, okay, as far as recovery, mental health support, I think, Rita, you mentioned the work, family, finance, and health. So I came up with the idea of something that I call the Integrity Sanctuary, the Integrity Fellowship and Sanctuary, which would be a place where individuals working who are anti-corruption professionals or anti-corruption activists, as well as whistleblowers, and the overlap is obvious in some cases, to extract them when they're in places where there's no whistleblower protection. The rule of law is pathetic, very weak, and get them out to a place of safe haven for a period of time. And I thought that period of time should be 2 or 3 years with their families, and to then support them with the services that we've just heard from others, mental health, among others, being primary in the initial stage, and then the regeneration. And I thought this should be university adjacent. I wanted to have a university affiliation so that they could reskill, they could develop research networks, etc. They have a platform and a place to talk to others, and sufficient numbers of other people in the same situation so that they have a community around who would help them rebuild. And then the third and final part is the reentry phase. How are you going to reenter? So this is not an asylum idea. It's how are you going to go back recharged and rejoin the battle. So those are the 3 components of it, and called the Integrity Sanctuary. So for the last few years, together with some other very active anti-corruption professionals, one of whom is sitting here, we have decided to realize this. So after some thought, we decided that we would locate it in Canada. I'll say it, the English pronunciation Canada and the French pronunciation Canada.
Oui.
Canada. So we've been working with the Canadian, with a university, which is now we have a formal affiliation with, the Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly known as Ryerson, but they changed the name because of the connections to the slave trade. So now it's TMU, Toronto Metropolitan, where there's the Center for Free Expression, which is going to be the Integrity Sanctuary's academic and fellowship home. Now, the big question is immigration. See, I'm bilingual. Canada, and how to get people in from these situations into Canada. And the Canadian government was very receptive, I have to say. And over several months, working at the ministerial level, we have recently received essentially a very warm opening to bring our people in on some sort of special basis. So that was a key element, which is now in place. And so we are now intending to do some fundraising with the intention of opening our doors formally at TMU, at Integrity Sanctuary, in this coming January, if not sooner. I'll skip the details of selection and so on. We can talk about that separately. We have many other people who have a lot to say. So that is now the key building blocks are in place. I am pleased that donors have expressed to me personally, privately, that they have a strong interest in supporting this particular effort to grow eventually to a maximum of 15 at this particular center, and perhaps having others in other parts of the world. This I see as part of, as Claudia referred to, the Scholars at Risk program and the Practitioners at Risk program, which are similar in some ways, and also human rights defenders programs, as communities that should and will network among themselves because they have a common interest in change at their national level. So these communities of, we'll call them temporary or permanent exiles, will form kind of a backbone of a network that can individually and collectively cause change in their home countries. So that is our solution, and I think as I say, I expect that at the next conference we'll be able to talk more about the actual operation, proof of concept, and so on.
Thank you so much, Jim. No, and just to say, the grinning is because although I'm based in Glasgow, I'm obviously Canadian, the way I say about. And placing it in Toronto and at the Toronto Metropolitan University is great. Canada has one of the worst whistleblower protection systems, but we hope that this will help because if they do support this kind of work, then they're taking it very seriously. And hopefully we'll get more of the legal protections as well in Canada. Claudia.
Okay. So I think that whistleblowers need a space to go after. They have to denounce wrongdoing. And it's not the same to denounce in Canada or Germany or the United States where you can feel safe, that at least your life is not, under risk. But in some countries that are extremely vulnerable to corruption and autocrats, it's difficult to become a whistleblower. So I helped to create a space for Democrat and anti-corruption defenders a few years ago, and we were able to establish a very strong program of fellowships at George Mason University, where we host a program for Central Americans leaders. And we had focused on three main topics. One was building capacities that they will need to confront the problems that they have. Another is a strong academic program in different issues related to corruption, democracy. And the last topic, and that is extremely important, is the emotional support. So they can have someone that will help them to find their strength again, because this is key to continue doing the work that they care about. And last year we were able to support 14 fellows in this program, and we hope that it can continue improving.
Great, great, wonderful. As we talked with Vladimir, do you want to, because again it can come back and people can interject, but the partnerships that you do also in Serbia, obviously, I think that's one of the key things that comes out and came out from this morning, that within country there's all the partnerships you need, and then there's other partnerships. So just discuss sort of the networking and the partnerships that have helped you in your work and what that achieves perhaps even outside of Serbia.
So, as journalists, we obviously know politicians, and then when the government changed in 2012, the current president of Serbia then became deputy prime minister in 2012. Now he's the president. But we knew him. And he was one of the sole voices that protested us getting fired from the newspaper. So as I said, we used this brief window of opportunity to get the law passed. But the crucial thing happened at the working group to draft the law. Because there, the working group not only had whistleblowers, we had many fine judges, prosecutors, trade unions, the Chamber of Commerce, but crucially, the then deputy Supreme Court president was member of the working group, and somehow we bonded. And then when the law was passed, she offered to partner with Pištaljka to do training for judges. And at one point, well, for a long time actually, the Supreme Court building was adorned in Pištaljka's colors, and our posters were everywhere on each floor of the Supreme Court. And from then, one thing led to another. We started working with judges, do trainings with the Judicial Academy, and then when we started this, the prosecutor's office reached out and said, we would like to have the same training. And, we obviously accepted. And so you make these connections and partnerships all along. And so, as you know, one thing leads to another. Last year, Samantha Feinstein, whom you already mentioned, from the Government Accountability Project, suggested that we partner and try and go for a UN resolution on the protection of whistleblowers at the UNCAC, at COSP 10 in Atlanta. And obviously, since it's a UN thing, you need a government to sponsor the resolution. And so we went to the president of Serbia, who supported this. And it took a while to get things going with different ministries in Serbia. But in September, Serbia officially filed the draft resolution. And from then on, so another key aspect was that Dragana Matović of Pištaljka and myself were then basically delegated by Serbia as experts to do the negotiations. And in the first informal negotiations in Vienna, the justice minister came with us, which was the first time ever that a justice minister of any country was present at an informal negotiation on a resolution. And then we had about 2 months of negotiations in Vienna, mostly online. And then we went to Atlanta. And there it was very exhausting, but very rewarding in the end. And so how you make Luis Portas, who's from the UNODC, was there and can testify to this. It was really exhausting. Negotiations were going on from early morning until after midnight for 5 days.
Telenovela dramas, right? Telenovela dramas.
Telenovela, yes. And we had lots of objections and reservations from a number of countries. Venezuela, Iran, Russia, China, Egypt. You're right. Pablo was also there.
There are a few other civil society.
But we were able to use, coming back to the networking, we were able to use our experience and expertise, but also Serbia's position in the world to get some of the countries to co-sponsor the resolution. So in the end, it was Serbia and the State of Palestine sponsoring the resolution. And co-sponsors were, believe it or not, the European Union, the Russian Federation, Norway, Thailand. Louise, help me out. Who else was there?
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, correct. The EU, I said EU. A whole bunch of countries supporting. And we had difficult negotiations on some of the terms, including the term whistleblower, which most countries said they cannot accept as a part of the title of the resolution, but in the end we managed to get it in the text of the resolution. But also difficult negotiations on rewards for whistleblowers, on the motives test. So we managed to get into the resolutions that whistleblowers' motives should not be investigated. So it says that personal reasons of whistleblowers to blow the whistle should not be investigated by countries. And so now we have a global standard for whistleblower protection that is not mandatory for any government, but is, as I said, a strong sort of commitment by basically all UN member states to further protect whistleblowers.
Thank you very much. And I think one of the things that it's really important to understand in the room is that because whistleblowing is very much a citizen's issue, it will always require civil society to be monitoring, to watch it, because no matter how, and there are good-intentioned people within government and within corporations, but in a sense they're seeking, by promoting and continuing with whistleblowing, they are basically encouraging people to challenge their decision-making. And that's not necessarily comfortable. And so it always depends on civil society being there. And what's so interesting is even when you're working in the field and you're challenging these governments, you can still be the experts in the room. They will still work with you as civil society because you are looking at it on ways. The island we all stand on is protecting the public interest and minimizing the risk to the whistleblowers and supporting them. But we're doing it because it matters for society and it matters that these disclosures are raised and that we can address them. So it's a really interesting dynamic because in the US, the experience is that it's often bipartisan, obviously at different times in history it's gotten less, or more recently it's been less bipartisan at times, but in most of the countries that I know of, there's actually been support from different sides of a political spectrum to support whistleblowing. It makes sense for business, it makes sense for the public interest. There are strange bedfellows that come out of whistleblowing. But getting back to a little bit of the other networks that you use, because obviously there was a lot of civil society working with the UNODC as well, but with other civil society and governments. But when you're doing your work, for instance, Arpita, are there other partners that you're working with around the whistleblowing piece?
There's three areas, really. The first is there are our international partnerships. So first, we've been working for the last few years with the Foundation of Institutional Development in Ukraine and the National Agency in Corruption Prevention. And our work over the last few years, we had a report back recently in person to understand where the Ukrainian whistleblowing legislation now is. And what I can report to you is that they now have a very narrow definition of a whistleblower. Whistleblower is really just someone who reports anti-corruption offences. It doesn't go wider than that. So we'll be working with them to comply with international standards and expand that definition. But what they have done, and what the state has done, is set up a legal support fund for advice and representation for those whistleblowers, free legal aid, a protection system for security threats experienced by whistleblowers. They have legislated to provide psychological support, that's certified psychiatrists, psychologists, paid for by the state for a period of time for whistleblowers, and also financial incentivization in a compensation scheme that needs to meet certain thresholds. When we talk about partnerships, sometimes we look at those countries with sort of really well-developed whistleblowing legislation as gold standard people who, we must come to us, the UK and the US, and we will impart our knowledge and we will tell you how it should be done. But let me tell you something. The UK does not have legal aid. It does not have psychological support or assistance. It does not have protection from security threats. So this is very much a mutual, we have signed a memorandum of cooperation because we have a lot to learn. And sometimes when you have well-developed systems, it takes a lot of political will to move them into something that is better developed and more fit for purpose for the age and what we know. The second area that we're working on, it's quite exciting, is an issue of best practice research and how we can share that more collaboratively so that we all have access to it. And what we are working on at Parrhesia is an international journal of whistleblowing, which is being backed by a publisher. And we're at early stages of trying to put together an international editorial board. And what we notice with whistleblowing is it's not a thing in itself. So where it sits is around ethics and integrity, psychological trauma, business management, HR. There are so financial fraud, anti-corruption. There are so many areas. So we've been asked to construct a wide editorial board. And that's what we're attempting to do. That's our next stage, to try and put this journal together so that we have the best of academic research. We already have an eminent international academic council. So we're in a good place to try and get the best information across to international NGOs to use it so they can inform their systems and the work that they do.
Is it okay to stop you there? Because
Yep.
and I do want to open it up for some questions, but we run out of time so fast. But in terms of GlobaLeaks and setting it up, can you give some examples of partnerships, but also maybe some of the civil society partnerships?
Yes, of course. Actually, I would say that everything is about collaboration and partnership because we are just the two of us in the organization. Like many others, I think organizations are a small organization, and without the collaboration with others, I mean, we wouldn't even exist, maybe. As I said, we operate, we are based in Italy, but and one of the most successful collaboration we have had since for the last 15 years is with Transparency International Italy, and because there is in Italy the chapter of Transparency had this high sensibility about security of whistleblowers. So since the very beginning. They adopted the GlobaLeaks platform to receive reports from citizens. And since this collaboration grows over the years, we decided before even in Italy, we have a whistleblowing law since 2017 that requests public organization to adopt an encrypted platform. So for one time, I mean, Italy is in the vanguard of anti-corruption, at least for this aspect. But even before the law, together with Transparency International Italy, we decided to promote this digital tool among public organizations and private companies. Then the context changed and became even more, favorable in this perspective. And in 2018, 1 year after the law was approved, we decided to create this project, which is called Whistleblowing IT, to provide all public administration in Italy the GlobaLeaks software for free. And together with TI Italy, we managed to do it. And today we have nearly 5,000 public administration using GlobaLeaks for free. And actually, we don't just provide a software. It's not just that. We provide support to this organization. We help them to define better policies. We support them in managing the reports. We provide documentation to set procedures, whistleblowing procedures. So it's a more comprehensive support we give to public administration in Italy for free. And we are quite proud of that because actually one organization out of 4 in the public sector is benefiting from our project. And one point that I would like to mention about this project is the sustainability of the project, because we have been listening today about the problem that many civil society organizations have in funding their activities and to give a long-term sustainability to their activities. And with this project, we managed to have to give for free the software by gaining money from those private organizations that want to pay for having the software in a more personalized, customized way, while we offer this in a standard shape to other public organizations. So it's a project that, together with the collaboration with Transparency Italy, which has the more comprehensive expertise on anti-corruption, and on our side we provide more technical expertise, we managed to have this successful project, and to also, thanks to the Transparency International network, to replicate it even in other countries, because during the last 2 years, we have been funded by the European Commission in a project to try to replicate this initiative also in other European countries. Now Slovenia is trying to do that, and so we also develop materials and guidelines and all that is necessary for other organizations that are interested in this initiative to replicate and try to support public and private organizations in setting up effective whistleblowing systems.
Thank you, Suzanne. Susanna, so we're going to go quickly, but I know you can do it, and then open up to questions, and hopefully we'll get some questions for you too.
Okay.
So 2 minutes each, please.
So we're working on socializing the problem and how corruption violates human rights. It's hard sometimes for daily people to understand that, for example, there's budget for medicine, but in Mexico, women and kids are not able to get their chemo's medicine. So in the end, where's the right to health? We're working on socializing the problem. We developed in 2020 a platform called Denuncia Corrupción Coronavirus that allowed people to report corruption during the COVID crisis and in the health attention. It also, we offered it to public authorities as it allowed them to map corruption acts, and their frequency. Of course, the lack of political will and sometimes fake commitments and speeches. But in this, we have learned, and I think Mexico is a great example for this, how you have one of the countries with the most solid anti-corruption frameworks, yet I don't need to say that much you can just look out where's Mexico on the index of impunity and corruption. But one example of this, the need of these partnerships is just one recent exercise working group that was actually funded by INL, but it conjoined the National Participation Committee of the National Anti-Corruption System, which we have some of their members here, academics, legal professionals, prosecutors, Mexican prosecutors, which are also here, the Ministry of the Public Function and congressperson, and it was a great exercise that ended up in the project of a law to protect whistleblowers. During right now, we were in elections. We've just decided to hold on for the political turmoil to pass, to actually be able to present it in the Congress. Also, with the Band Center from the New York Bar Association, we have developed some guides for migrant people. I think we're not speaking too much about corruption and the lack of whistleblowing channels for migrants to report all the disproportionate impact that they suffer in their migration routes. And in those efforts, we've also been pushing it forward with the Mexican Agency for International Cooperation to be able to put these resources out on the embassies and outside of Mexico to keep on pushing for this fighting transnational corruption.
Sorry, that's such a good example, and can we just leave it there for now, because I know there's so much. And Jennifer.
I'll be very quick. So, as I alluded to at the end of mine, with the whistleblowers we're working with directly, we put a network around them. If they need legal support, we go out to our legal networks and we find them. If we can't provide it directly, we provide access to lawyers who can provide it in the jurisdiction. We encourage everyone to get psychosocial support. We've got digital security in contexts where physical security is the issue. We provide safe houses. We provide clean laptops. We provide clean phones. we provide what's needed, and part of the way we do that is we've set up a fund. And we haven't talked a lot on this panel about the costs of whistleblowing. I had a journalist ask a whistleblower the other day, what do you stand to gain from this? The response is, you stand to lose a lot. And a big chunk of that is financially. So we have set up a fund that we continue to grow so that whistleblowers who need subsistence in certain contexts can get grants to not have to worry about where you're going to feed your family, how you're going to feed your family, or if you need a safe house, there's a grant there to just get you a safe house, or whatever else the need might be. With journalists, we are doing a lot at the moment in building trainings to try to get journalists to understand that as much as they have an ethical duty to not be biased in their reporting, they also have an ethical duty to whistleblowers to get them proper support. And trying to help them understand that the whistleblowing experience is very different from just being a source, that often the whistleblowers they're interacting with, even if they don't seem like it, are experiencing some sort of trauma, and that the long-term impacts on them are going to run much further than when the story runs. And I'll give you a brief example of what not to do that I always use with the journalists, which is one of our public whistleblowers is Mark McGann of the Uber files. For those of you who were paying attention a couple of years ago, a former senior executive of Uber, released a number of laptops to The Guardian and a consortium of international journalists through the ICIJ. On Friday night, The Guardian called me and said, what can you do for a whistleblower? They wouldn't tell me anything. I said, can you tell me where? Can you tell me what? No, just tell me what you do. On Sunday night, the story dropped in 40 countries. And on Monday morning, they called me and they said, we've already pre-recorded an interview with the whistleblower. He's going public in 3 hours. Can you get on the phone and protect him? The answer to that is no. And so what we do with a lot working with journalists is try to get them to understand that you don't have to getting your whistleblower support early does not mean killing the story. I'm happy to say that Mark made it through. There were a few very stressful months, a threat of a lawsuit, a lot of other things. But then it comes to that second part, which you guys are talking about, which is to say, I think fellowships are not just important in contexts where there's a lot of insecurity and you need to get the individual out. But what we're finding with public whistleblowers is the trauma is so great, the idea of them reimagining what part 2 of their life looks like post-whistleblowing is really hard in those initial months and year after they go public. And giving them that space of a fellowship or a home where they can just decompress and get support from others who have been through it is really important.
Okay, I'm going to ask, this is wonderful, thank you so much, but I'm going to ask for your indulgence so that you can ask some questions. We might run a little bit over, but if there are questions or comments, please, can we... So Lise, I can see immediately, and then I will do a better scan. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yep.
It is on. I am going to introduce myself just as Dr. Liesel Groenewald, and that's directed at you because you were looking for an editorial board for the journal. So I'm just volunteering, being an academic and a practitioner. Okay, that aside, I wanted to ask, and I'm not sure who to address it to, but you were talking, Jennifer, the whole time about source and a source of information. So in South Africa, where we are looking at the amendment of our Protected Disclosures Act, there's this question, more or less to this, is a source, an informant, and a whistleblower the same thing? I have my own views on it, but I would, because you were talking about a source so often, I would like to have your opinion. Thank you.
Great. We'll ask the questions. So we had a lady over here, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, just close. Yeah, we can hear you.
Just closer. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Nkebe Kanyane. I'm a prosecutor from South Africa. What I'm interested in is finding out from any of the jurisdictions, what sort of legal framework do you have in terms of compensation? So as the lady from home there explained, we are reviewing our laws currently, but we don't have a dispensation for compensation. And I think all the speakers here spoke about it, just the harm that they get into when they become whistleblowers. So I'd be interested in knowing that, some of the challenges in implementing it, some of the best practices perhaps when we look into this, into compensation of whistleblowers. Thank you.
Great. And there's a gentleman in the front here. Right here in the front.
Definitely it's related. I'm Carlos Guerrero, co-founder of DLM Mexico. Thank you for your presentations. It's kind of similar to that. Is there any room to talk about reparation as a consequence of the harm suffered by retaliation? Or is it that we just have to focus on the protection measures? Do we have to center our attention on the state liability for the omission to protect whistleblowers in any country?
Okay, so we have 3 questions. Do you want to start with the first, Jennifer, denunciator and former
No,
source?
I mean, it's a great question.
Whistleblower.
It's a fascinating one. We debate it all the time internally. We take a very holistic approach, right? So my argument is if they are reporting wrongdoing, that makes them a whistleblower, right? And they're sharing information of wrongdoing with the intention of getting it out there. I think it's a pretty basic definition, right? I know there is this desire to carve up, right? But I think most of these individuals who are sharing with the media, and I said it at the beginning, right? Like, they've tried disclosing wrongdoing to everyone, right? They don't kind of accidentally wind up disclosing significant public interest information about wrongdoing to the media because they thought that's the first place I'm going to go, right? And so I am a very big advocate of a very broad definition of that and protecting people who are disclosing wrongdoing.
And then we'll talk about compensation from the point of view of first the prosecutor and some of the best practices.
Can I just add
yes,
to
of course.
What Jennifer was saying? For me, a source, as a journalist, speaking as a journalist, a source can be, an official, a government official, who's my source for information about what's going on in the government. They don't need to report any wrongdoing. An informant is somebody who's getting paid by the police or the prosecutor to get information about crimes. A whistleblower can be a source, but a source who, like Jennifer said, who is reporting wrongdoing, some sort of wrongdoing. And to talk about compensation, in the Serbian law, a whistleblower can ask for compensation. And we've had a number of cases where courts awarded compensation, but the problem is that the Serbian case law only allows very small sums that are like, on average, I think, 4,000 to 5,000 euros of compensation.
I'll just say in the compensation field for the United Kingdom, although lots of criticism of the current law because it hasn't caught up and it was one of the early laws, but one of the reasons it was uncapped. So if you took normal employment claims, for instance, to the tribunal, it was capped at a certain level and it got raised a little bit. But because it was about wrongdoing and you can lose your career, and it can be bankers who report wrongdoing as well as someone in a care home who's reporting wrongdoing, or in a nursery at different levels of professional skill with different compensation needs, and it's to restitute them for their losses. But it's difficult to get in some of in the employment tribunals, this issue of psychological harm, which is more what a civil court will do and look at the harms caused and pay you. So there is a lot more work that's being done, and in the standards to say full compensation for all the harm done, including the psychological harm and other things that people have had to pay for as part of the damage done. And then, of course, we've had the discussion around the rewards and incentives, but that is a different system. It is very much a way for regulators to get effective information, and if they really do it well, they will get effective information, but often it's quite limited who in the end is rewarded, because it does depend on it actually resulting in a prosecution. So these are all tools that need to be there, but a lot of whistleblowers do want to be put back in a position where they can continue with their life, but they're not looking to be rewarded for doing the right thing, because they're doing their jobs. What they want is to get on with their lives, and for this not to have happened, not to have had to fight for themselves instead of fighting for the public interest. or the public interest in being seen in what they were disclosing instead of somehow the messenger being the problem. And we've got to get over that and change that narrative in all of our countries.
And can I just add to what you said? The one thing I think we often don't talk about on the compensation front, I agree, it's part of a more holistic package, but it takes a lot of time. And whistleblowers need support immediately, right? So if you talk about something, we've talked a lot about rewards today, 5 years minimum before the SEC acts, probably longer than that, right? Even the tribunals in the UK, you're talking years, right? So there's a need on those fronts when you're talking about setting up those mechanisms, either find a way to do it quicker or some sort of safety net in the meantime, because restitution is going to take much longer than the whistleblower can afford.
And I'd like to add a little bit on that. None of the three of us here, I can say with complete confidence, were thinking about awards when we blew the whistle. It was certainly not on my mind. I imagine, knowing Claudia, it wasn't on hers, and Vladimir, no. So I think, as I tried to say this morning, I think we would provide legal support for that purpose, especially against the perpetrator of the retaliation, because nothing has been said here or elsewhere that is usually a provision of the law, that those who perpetrate retaliation are themselves liable for civil or criminal action, and never happens. So I would very much encourage that among those who would come to us. But that being said, it's nobody grows up wanting to be a whistleblower. So you find yourself by happenstance in that situation. So it's great if it happens, but it's not on the radar for most whistleblowers.
And I would just like to include, very quickly, and as I said, I think it's very different having a solid framework and an effective framework, like as Ms. Pita was saying. Probably compensation, although I think it's necessary to transform reporting culture, it won't necessarily apply or be as effective in every particular context. However, as the question raised, I think it's nurturing to put on the ground that besides compensation, there's also an area of opportunity on demanding states' responsibility and indemnization out of the lack or the omission on protecting whistleblowers and protecting victims of corruption. And there's a big area of opportunity to be exploited over there.
Yep. So what you've got here is civil society's responses to deal with both the immediate concerns of whistleblowers, knowing that we need a legal framework, knowing they should be absolutely compensated fully for their losses, but they need to have the support before they get there, because law is a slow beast. The lawyers in the room, we know that. Thank you so much. There is
one quick thing before everybody goes. Am I on still? Yeah. I am pleased that overnight we may have the first whistleblower elected to the U.S. Congress. In the election coming up in the fall, because I don't know if you follow U.S. politics. There was a lieutenant colonel named Alexander Vindman who blew the whistle on Trump's Ukraine fiasco, and he testified before Congress. He was running for office as a Democrat in suburban Washington, and he has been selected by the Democratic voters to run as a Democrat against the Republicans in the fall, and if he wins, he would be the first whistleblower to actually be elected to the Congress in the modern era.
On that fascinating note, thank you so much for your participation and for our speakers for explaining to us all they do and the importance of these discussions, so we all know what we're doing and we can tap each other's resources, and you can tap us for information and resources too. Thank you.